Chapter 541, Battle of Two Demons, an Incredible Win by Lord, by Mongrel. Looking at the cloud of blood rising above the arena, Siklus couldn't contain his enthusiasm. Today, there were no simultaneous duels, as there were only 32 contenders left. Each battle was intense and exciting, and received the full attention of the commentators. Looking at the cheering audience, Demi laughed. Indeed, Mongrel did very well against no weight. That aspect of his is a real menace, believe me. I've been on the receiving end of those explosions way too many times. Demi had been one of the first renowned duelists of the dreamscape, back when it had been just growing popular 10 or so years ago, so he was talking from experience. Siklus glanced at the chat, knowing that it was a good time to involve the viewers in the discussion. Coincidentally, he noticed a comment concerning something that he himself was curious about. Yeah, very devious. But Demi, don't you feel like Mongrel behaved a bit out of character today? I mean, he practically called a respected dreamscape veteran an idiot, with how noble, dignified, and chivalrous Mongrel usually is. Demi thought for a bit, then shook his head. You see, Siklus, I respected Mongrel before, but now I truly admire him. It takes a very talented fighter to quickly recognize a battle style true. Mongrel is talented, but he is also wise. He smiled. Because it takes a very wise man to quickly recognize an idiot. And make no mistake, this guy is a complete buffoon. Believe me, I have the misfortune of knowing him pretty well. I mean, only an idiot would end up with an alias like what? No, wait. Right. Instantly, a deluge of comments flooded the chat. True, Mongrel is so wise. Wise, deadly, and handsome. How do you know that he's handsome, fool? He never takes off that creepy mask. You mean SHE is handsome? Wait, that doesn't sound right. Can someone ban that troll already? Demi is right. Only a complete idiot would end up with that alias. Why would an idiot like that even try to fight someone as wise as Lord Mongrel? Tui. Oh, I remember where I've seen that weird alias. Sonny was preparing for his next duel when he suddenly remembered how he had entered the dreamscape for the first time. Back then, he had almost ended up with that exact name after accidentally saying the words out loud. Luckily, it had already been taken. Otherwise, Sonny could have been called what? No, wait, himself. So that's the guy, poor fellow. Not that being called Mongrel was much better. Slightly amused, he sat down and circulated his essence through the coils of the soul serpent, aiming to replenish it completely before the next fight. He had a feeling that it wasn't going to be easy. He was right. None of his next 3 duels were easy, although for very different reasons. The second opponent he faced today was called Loaf. It was a young man with shoulder-length hair who wore a light armor, wielding a round shield and a spear. His technique was impeccable, but the most dangerous thing about him was his speed. Loaf was fast, very fast, so fast in fact that Sonny could barely see some of his movements. The worst part was that this speed did not come from an aspect ability, but simply from skill, training, and incredibly precise essence control. Unlike Castor, who could move with insane speed constantly, the young man seemed deceptively slow until he chose to attack, at which point his weapons almost teleported from one place to another. Sonny only managed to resist because his enemy skillfully masked the movements of his body, but didn't think to mask the movements of his shadow. The smart thing to do was to kill the deadly opponent as fast as possible, but Sonny was utterly fascinated by the way Loaf used his soul essence, so he lingered, trying to infer details of this technique from how the young man fought. That was why Loaf ended up being the first human to make Mongrel bleed. At some point, his spear slid between the breastplate of the mantle and one of the spaulders, sinking deep into Sonny's armpit. The pain was blinding. Twisting the blade and then retreating to save himself from a retaliatory strike, Loaf glanced at the vibrant crimson liquid on his spear and smiled. "So you're human after all." Sonny suppressed the pain and tilted his head slightly. "Am I?" Then he dashed forward and went all out, aiming to end the fight as soon as possible, not because he was done learning Loaf's style, but because even with blood weave, he wasn't sure that he would last long, considering how serious his wound was. Thanks to his brutal battle with Castor, Sonny already knew how to deal with fast enemies. So, in the end, neither speed nor incredible mastery of essence managed to save the young man from his blade. The deep wound disappeared as soon as Sonny returned to the black void. Interesting, very interesting. I have ways to go as far as controlling essence goes, it seems. The next duel could have been really, really tough, but ended up being only slightly torturous. His enemy this time was named Everrain and possessed a powerful sorceress aspect centered around gravity manipulation. As soon as the fight started, it felt as though a mountain fell on his shoulders. Sonny was barely able to move, while his enemy masterfully weaved the effects of aspect abilities into an already swift and lethal combat technique, making for a truly deadly combination. Luckily, Sonny had Feather of Truth, which diminished the burden a little. More importantly, he had a rich experience dealing with the crushing. Even though Everrain was able to make him sweat by manipulating gravity with admirable ingenuity, he was victorious in the end. The third duel, however, made him rethink a lot of things. This time, his enemy was a friendly-looking guy with a funny alias, Dionyzer. Weirdly, he wore simple garments instead of an armor and wielded no weapons. At first, Sonny thought that this was another sorcerer, however, he couldn't have been more wrong. As soon as the voice of the dreamscape announced the start of the duel, his opponent changed. His muscles suddenly ballooned and shifted, ripping through the simple clothes. His skin glistened, becoming covered by metallic scales. His nails grew into terrifying talons, and his teeth turned into long, sharp fangs. In just a few moments, what faced Sonny was not a human, but a frightening hybrid creature that resembled a predatory humanoid lizard. A split second later, the creature was already upon him in a furious whirlwind of claws and teeth. However, while it looked like a nightmare creature and was as strong and fearsome as one, the hybrid fought with a measured technique of an experienced, cunning, battle-hardened brawler. The effect was nothing short of terrifying. The ability humans received after conquering the third nightmare and becoming transcendent was called a transformation ability, but not all transformation-type abilities were meant only for saints. While extremely rare, some aspects manifested similar powers at earlier stages. Song Sation possessed an aspect like that as well. However, while Sonny knew that such awakened existed, this was his first time facing one in battle. And what a battle it was! It was really worthy of being the penultimate spectacle of the whole tournament. It was also the first fight where Sonny felt that he really might lose. The enemy was just too strong, ferocious, and overbearing, while also being skilled, intelligent, and subtle. Fighting him was like fighting a devil, or a demon at least. In fact, while Sonny had no idea, this was what their duel was being called on the network, the Battle of Two Demons. And one of these demons was bound to fall. Under the stunned gazes of numerous spectators, both those in the dreamscape and those watching the broadcast on the screens of their communicators, Mongrel was pushed back by the rampaging monster, his dark Odachi sliding off the steel scales without leaving even a scratch on them. Nothing he did seemed to have an effect. But then something changed. At some point, the demonic swordsman dismissed his great blade and lunged into a violent, terrifyingly brutal hand-to-hand combat with the towering creature, using his fists, legs, and even the horns of his mask to attack the enemy. His style changed, turning savage and vicious, insidiously deadly and utterly ruthless. Those who followed Mongrel for a while and knew a fair share about combat were stunned to recognize that style it was the same primal, devastating way of fighting the Barrow Wraiths had used during the recent Gate disaster. So Mongrel was able to learn from nightmare creatures as well. What a terrifying thought. The uncompromisingly cruel brawl lasted for a dreadfully long time. In the end, both fighters were bloodied and broken, their bodies battered, but their murderous wills as sharp and unshaken as ever. Mongrel's onyx armor had cracked in several places under the unrelenting assault of adamantine talons, but the hybrid's scales were also shattered and torn, his movements slowing down more and more. And then, unexpectedly, it was all over. Mongrel had caught his enemy into an arm lock, and then bent, straining with all his might. A loud crack could be heard in the deathly silence that had settled over the arena a while back, and the creature's neck suddenly twisted at an unnatural angle. At first, people couldn't believe their eyes. Only when the massive body of the hybrid reptile shuddered, and then turned into a flood of white sparks did they open their eyes wide and started screaming with shock, joy, and admiration. Swaying lightly, Sonny looked at the disappearing torrent of sparks and grinned. One more left. Gee, I wonder what I'll get this time. Sonny had received generous rewards for these 3 duels, well, for 2 of them at least. One was an ascended memory of the 2nd tier, which was an arrow. The second was an ascended shield of the 3rd tier. Both had pretty great enchantments, but he had no time to study them in detail. All he had determined was that the memories were good enough to not be fed to Saint. The 3rd reward, though, was a bitter disappointment. It would have been rather amazing, actually, for anyone else. 100 soul shards, no less. In the waking world, this was a precious resource. Even lesser legacy clans would not scoff at that amount. But since Sonny couldn't claim it, he was left with nothing. Curses. His disappointment didn't last long, however. In the end, it didn't really matter. The real boon was the prizes those in 2nd and 1st place would receive, and Sonny had already cemented his position in the final duel. The winner and the runner-up were going to receive memories from Clan Valor's personal armory. And this was something every awakened desired, because the great clan was renowned not only for its knights. It was also famous for its forgers. Members of the Valor family often received aspects tied to forging and creation. Some of them could even create memories, tailor-made for destroying nightmare creatures and conquering the dangerous expanses of the dream realm. Sonny doubted that they would put something really unique as a prize for a public tournament, but anything from their vault was going to be precious. What's more, he had already enriched his mastery of Shadow Dance a lot. The last 3 duels especially had pushed him even closer to grasping its 2nd step. Now, he felt as though it was almost within his reach. So participating in the tournament was a pretty good idea, after all. I should really thank Rain. No, wait, she doesn't know that I am participating. Also, I am not participating in the tournament, Mongrel is. Damn, why is everything so convoluted? I should really rest for a bit. After the battle with Dionyser, he wasn't in the best shape. That fight was nothing short of brutal. Even Sonny, who usually thrived in brutality, was a bit stunned by how violent it ended up being. His wounds had disappeared as soon as the duel ended, but mental exhaustion remained. His essence was also really spent, since that was how the dreamscape functioned. Luckily, the organizers of the tournament were smart enough to not schedule the final fight anytime soon. First, there would be the duel for the 3rd and 4th place, as well as some entertainment. He had hours to rest and recuperate. With a tired sigh, Sonny left the dreamscape, climbed out of the pod, and went to make himself a tasty dinner. While eating, Sonny studied his opponent. This year, the final duel was going to be a bit unusual, because both challengers were not powerful newcomers who entered the dreamscape to win the tournament rewards, but habitual duelists, well, if Mongrel could be considered one. He had heard about the woman he was going to face too, but not much. Her alias was Queen Bee, and she was almost as enigmatic as Sunny himself. Unlike other popular duelists, she didn't broadcast or promote her fights, preferring instead to remain anonymous and under the radar. It seemed as though she was only interested in dueling itself and nothing else. From what he knew, Queen Bee had never lost a duel. She was an undefeated champion of the arenas. Why would someone that powerful hang out in an illusory game? He had no idea, but Sunny wasn't one to judge, since he was also wasting his time there despite having better things to do. He had his reasons, so maybe she did too. Or maybe it was just a fun hobby. In any case, the network was full of theories about who Queen Bee might be. There was even a rumor that she was not human at all, but instead an artificial construct created to keep the players from reaching the top spot and to remind them to always strive for greater mastery. Which was complete idiocy, of course, considering that Dreamscape was not capable of emulating actual intelligence. If it was, Awakened wouldn't waste time fighting each other and train against simulated nightmare creatures instead. But people believed what they wanted to believe. And people were also insane. What the hell? Sunny stared at the communicator with a weird expression. To no surprise whatsoever, Queen Bee had her own army of unreasonable fans, even though she didn't want any. And currently, that army was engaged in an all-out war with Mongrel's own unwanted horde of followers. The network was bursting with venom and vitriol produced by both sides. Lord Mongrel, that loser, Tui. Come back when he's King Mongrel, you tasteless dimwits. You fool, Mongrel never claimed to be a lord and he would not want to be a king. Mongrel is one of us, common people. Want to follow a tyrannical monarch, do it privately, you sheep. Who are you calling sheep, you sheep? That shady Mongrel guy has literal horns, so think before you bleat. Guys, can we all calm down? Why are we arguing? Isn't it obvious that Mongrel is Queen Bee? They're the same person. There won't be a duel. That guy is insane. Mongrel can't compare to our noble queen's left pinky. That guy is whack. That pathetic wannabe princess can't compare to honorable Lord Mongrel. Ridiculous. Well, at least we can agree that the previous commenter is an idiot. You're an idiot. I guess not. Sunny stared at the screen, his eye twitching. After a while, he turned away. Humanity is a mistake. Maybe it's time to give someone else a chance. I hear mushrooms are a pretty neat species. Turning off the communicator, Sunny concentrated on devouring his food, even though all that nonsense had almost killed his appetite. Sunny's appetite, however, was as resilient as he himself was, maybe even more. It was more or less impossible to kill. A few hours later, Sunny returned to the arena. It was time to end this spectacle and reap his rewards. However, first, he had to defeat the strongest opponent yet. It's gonna be fine. I'll get a sweet memory either way. But winning would be much better. As soon as he appeared, the crowd cheered. Hearing the thunderous cheer, Sunny almost flinched. The last duel of the tournament was different from all the rest. The courtyard had changed slightly, somehow becoming even more magnificent. The grandstands were extended, with dozens of thousands of spectators crowding the stone seats. Their cheers blended into a deafening, excited roar that rose and fell rhythmically, like the sound of a turbulent sea. Rose petals were raining from above, covering the arena in a beautiful carpet. No matter how cynical Sunny wanted to be about the whole thing, it was hard not to feel his blood boil at this scene. He turned his head slightly, taking in the sight of the chanting crowd. Then, his sight lingered for a few moments on a tall tribune that loomed above the arena, decorated with the vibrant vermilion banners of the great clan Valor. Since this was the final duel, very special people were going to spectate it in person. Sunny easily recognized the creator of the dreamscape, who was dressed in ridiculously colorful silken robes and looked like a parrot that had taken a bath in a tub of face powder. He still couldn't believe that this gaudy clown was an actual saint. The person near him had to be the representative of valor then. Sonny couldn't see much, and just noted that it was a young woman with dark wavy hair and alabaster skin. She wore an intricate suit of lusterless, black armor and a red cape, which was the same color as the banner of her clan. Her sharp and austere appearance was in stark contrast with the saint of Dreamscape. The Tribune was too far away to see any details. But Sonny wasn't inclined to stare at a legacy from a great clan, anyway. He was already uncomfortable knowing that she would be observing him fight. On the other hand, I better put up a good show. Who knows, maybe if that girl likes it, I'll receive an extra good memory. Throwing these thoughts out of his mind, Sonny finally lowered his gaze and studied his opponent. Since Sonny knew some of the best fighters of his generation, he had entertained the idea that he might have met the formidable Queen Bee outside of the dreamscape already. But no, she didn't seem familiar. The famous duelist was seemingly in her 30s, and even though the lower half of her face was hidden behind an elegant half-mask, he was sure that he had never seen her before. She stood calmly in the center of the arena, as if not affected by the cheering crowd and the esteemed guests in the audience at all. From just one glance, Sonny knew that he was looking at a combat master. Everything about the regal woman spoke of skill, grace, and resolve. She wore a light metal armor and wielded a slender estoc, its blade long and sharp. There was a strange serenity about her that somehow seemed simultaneously alien and familiar. Clarity, this is the same vibe Neff sometimes gave off. Indeed, it was the same type of clarity that Nephi's and Sonny himself possessed. But while Changing Star was sharp and inevitable like a striking sword, Queen Bee was not. On the contrary, she seemed deceptively placid. What a weird contradiction. The woman studied him too, allowing Sonny to look her in the eyes. They weren't blue, gray, green, or even purple, and instead seemed to shift from one color to another, as if reflecting her mood. The strangest thing about them, though, was that those weren't the eyes of a killer. Sonny knew how to recognize one, because he was a killer himself. He suppressed the desire to scratch the back of his head. Combat master, but not a killer. Don't tell me that this is really just her hobby. What kind of a hobby was that? In any case, this was going to make things a little easier for him. Sure, Queen Bee might have been a prodigal duelist. She wouldn't have gotten to the finale of the tournament otherwise, but without the killing instinct, defeating someone like Sonny would be nearly impossible. For him, combat was not something interesting or engaging. It was not something he did for fun or even his profession. It was simply his life. God of War was not called the God of Life for nothing. Life was a constant, brutal struggle, and Sonny knew it better than most. That was why he was such a vicious and cruel fighter, never missing out on the tiniest chance to destroy his enemy. That was not to say that the duel was going to be easy. Killer or not, Queen Bee was still a fearsome opponent. With a sigh, he summoned the black Odachi, put its blade on his shoulder and walked forward. The trumpets sang, and the voice of the dreamscape announced the names of the fighters, lunging into a solemn speech afterward. Sonny didn't listen to it and simply approached the middle of the arena, then hesitated and performed a small, awkward bow toward the graceful woman. He wasn't a courteous person, but in this situation, bowing seemed somehow appropriate. Queen Bee looked at him calmly and nodded lightly. Then she raised her estoc into position. This is going to be tricky. He sighed, gripped the hilt of the soul serpent, and lunged into a lightning-fast attack. What was the point of wasting time? Sonny was trying to overwhelm his opponent in one fell swoop, but of course, he failed. The long blade of the slender estoc flew with incredible speed, preventing him from approaching Queen Bee to deliver even a single strike. For a few seconds, nothing but the ringing of steel could be heard above the arena. Even the audience grew quiet, looking at the incredible fight with bated breath. Unlike the previous duels, there was nothing flashy or particularly spectacular about this one. It wasn't as brutal as the battle between Mongrel and fearsome shapeshifter Dionyzer, nor was as strange and exciting as his fight against the gravity sorcerer Everrain. There were no fascinating aspect abilities flying around, and instead, it was all about skill, steel, and technique. However, people who knew even a little bit about combat couldn't take their eyes off the intense confrontation. Every strike, every block, every step the fighters took was full of flawless precision, insight, and clear resolve. This was a battle of two masters, and thus it was much more thrilling and breathtaking than anything else they had seen in this tournament. Sunny, however, was having much less fun than the audience. In fact, he wasn't having any. What the hell? What is going on? Something was very, very wrong with this duel. He had noticed it almost instantly, but couldn't do anything to prevent the whole fight from going sideways. In fact, although it seemed as though he was holding his own and even advancing on the Regal Queen, Sunny was actually scrambling to save his life every second. This woman was just too weird. There was something wrong with her shadow, not the harrowing, unnatural kind of wrong that he had felt before in the dream realm, but a very mundane kind of wrong which, nevertheless, threw him for a loop. It was as though there was a slight disconnect between how the shadow moved and how the woman casting it moved. More than that, although Sunny watched Queen Bee's movements and footwork carefully to predict her next attacks and react to them, each time, he was ending up being slightly mistaken. Even if he misplaced his sword by a centimeter, it was already enough to mess up the whole cadence of the fight and allow his enemy to bypass his defenses. How is she doing this? He had to find the answer very soon, because every second that passed could potentially lead to his loss. Sunny tried to deflect an incoming thrust but missed by a few millimeters once again. As the result, the swift estoc slid past the blade of the soul serpent and stung him in the chest, sending a tremor running through his entire body. The mantle of the underworld protected him, but Sunny wasn't deceived. Queen Bee was just measuring him, learning his patterns just like he was learning hers. When she achieved a sufficient level of understanding, the next attack would pierce his neck instead of ricocheting off his armor. Like hell. Gritting his teeth, he suddenly changed his style, summoning the domineering technique of Dar of the Maharana clan and applying it to the Odachi. He was already losing to the slender estoc in speed, so turning the soul serpent into a heavy great mace was not the best choice. So, Sunny just made adjustments to the battle style on the fly. But just as he shifted to another style, Queen Bee did the same, suddenly transforming her technique into a completely new one. Damn! They continued to fight, moving swiftly across the arena as their swords clashed against each other. Sunny was still at a disadvantage, which was only growing larger and larger as the seconds passed. Both fighters were proficient in various styles and could switch from one to another almost instantly, which made the duel especially thrilling. The audience was going crazy. Sunny was going crazy too, but for an entirely different reason. Thinker. Facing an enemy like this was a golden opportunity to enhance his comprehension of the shadow dance. But to do that, he first had to understand what exactly Queen Bee was doing. Why was her shadow behaving so strangely? Why was he always mistaken when judging the precise placement of her attacks? At some point, Sunny almost slid on the damn rose petals that littered the arena and only barely managed to keep his balance, dodging the tip of the estoc at the last second. Curses, damned things. Whose bright idea was it to fill the damned arena with trash? In fact, it was a miracle that neither of the two duelists had suffered from this treacherous footing already. A miracle, wait, a miracle. Dodging another lethal strike, he shifted from balanced technique to defense and glanced at Queen Bee's feet again. From start to finish, she had not been bothered by the rose petals once. And now that he paid attention to it, His eyes widened. Am I seeing things? No, he wasn't. Not only did his graceful opponent avoid losing her footing on the slippery petals, but none of them were also crushed under her armored boots. It was almost as if she was always hovering a few millimeters above the ground, without actually touching it. No, not almost. That was exactly what was happening. Such a small difference was very hard to notice, but it explained why the angle of how Queen Bee's shadow hit the ground was ever so slightly wrong, and why Sunny was always misjudging her attacks a tiny bit. A few millimeters was a very minuscule amount, but in a battle as precise and calculated as theirs, it made for a huge difference. Hell, was he right? There was only one way to find out. Sunny continued to fight for a few seconds, thinking carefully. He didn't correct his mistake, knowing that giving away his new understanding of Queen Bee's aspect ability, if it was an ability, would be a wrong move. Instead, he had to construct a trap and end the fight with it. But trapping someone as skilled and talented as his current opponent was not easy. In fact, deceiving someone who had clarity was a very tall task. Luckily, Sunny was a skilled fighter himself, but better yet, he was an even more talented deceiver. So, he continued to pretend and prepare his ambush, all the while greedily absorbing his enemy's technique. Now that he knew the secret, he could see it much more clearly. At some point in the duel, Mongrel seemed to finally make a mistake. He once again misjudged Queen Bee's intention and threw his blade too low, allowing the estoc to slide above it and flash toward his throat. However, it never hit its mark. Instead of piercing Mongrel's neck, the slender blade simply left a deep cut on his skin because at the last moment, the demonic swordsman moved ever so slightly to his left, and then almost instantly dashed forward. The dark Odachi hissed as it cut the air, and the figure in black armor moved past the graceful woman in light armor, stopping a couple of steps behind her. Feeling a stinging pain radiating from the shallow wound on his neck, Sunny sighed and lowered the soul serpent. Behind him, Queen Bee swayed lightly, and then fell into a torrent of white sparks. For a couple of seconds, the magnificent courtyard was silent. And then it became filled with deafening cheers from the crowd. Sunny looked at the celebrating spectators, breathing heavily. Did I really do it? Did I win? As if to answer his thought, the voice of the dreamscape announced. Challenger Queen Bee was eliminated. Glory to the victor. The champion of the annual Dream Tournament is. However, the pleasant voice was drowned by the chanting of the crowd. Mongrel, Mongrel, Mongrel. Sunny swayed slightly and thrust the soul serpent into the ground, leaning on it for support. His breath was labored and ragged. The wound on his neck had already disappeared, but drops of crimson blood remained on the onyx surface of his fearsome armor. All around him, the crowd was going crazy. Mongrel, Mongrel, Mongrel. The fight against the noble queen had not been as savage and bloody as some of his previous ones, but it had been incomparably harder. Even though each of the fighters had only managed to land one strike, the mental strain and physical effort the duel had required of them was nothing short of tremendous. Facing a true battle master was a tough trial. Sunny was completely spent, but more than that, he was also bitter and full of fury. Damnation, I almost had it. Not paying the crowd any attention, he closed his eyes and tried to concentrate on the dissipating sensation he had felt during the last seconds of the intense battle against the undefeated champion of the dreamscape. During their fight, after grasping the secret of the elusive queen, he had come close to making a breakthrough in his mastery of the shadow dance. It had been so close that Sunny could practically see it, but in the end, he failed to make the last step. There was an invisible obstacle in his way that had pushed him back, one that he didn't know how to overcome. Something was still missing. All the styles he had absorbed created a vast and solid foundation, but it was not enough. At this point, he knew that the problem was not quantity. He had already done the groundwork. Then what? What did he need to do to bring this stage of shadow dance to completion? Find a unifying element. Face even more formidable opponents. Sonny didn't know, which made him extremely frustrated. However, he didn't receive any time to savor his frustration or consider the issue deeper, because a thundering voice suddenly drowned out the roar of the crowd. Up on the central tribune, the saint of the dreamscape had risen from their seat and was now looking down with a brilliant smile, already in the middle of an excited speech. Right, I won. I'm about to receive my reward. Sonny grinned behind the mask and straightened, lifting the odachi and putting it back on his shoulder. The reward, wasn't this why he had entered the tournament in the first place? And now it was finally time to reap it. The saint was going on and on, showering Sonny with praise. Glory, marvelous, duty of the awakened true warrior, bravery, courage, future of humanity. Gods, can you just get to the point? Sonny didn't care about all that nonsense. He just wanted to receive his prize and disappear. However, he had to stand in the middle of the arena like the world's most fearsome scarecrow and endure the endless barrage of flowery words flying out of the grandiloquent saint's mouth. For a while. This guy, woman. This person really likes the sound of their voice, huh? At least it gave him a chance to recover. After something that felt like an eternity, the saint was finally finished with their long speech and gestured at the representative of valor. Personally reward the winner. As the crowd applauded, the young woman in black armor stood up and approached the parapet of the tribune. Then, she smiled at the audience and looked down at Sonny. Suddenly, he felt a small shiver run down his spine. The young woman was smiling in a friendly manner, but her eyes were as cold as the sharpest of swords. They were also of a strange, vibrant color, bright red, the same as her full lips and vermilion cape. With her alabaster skin and raven-black hair, she looked both beautiful and daunting, like a lethal blade. The pressure she exerted could be felt even from where Sonny stood. "Il master," the young woman spoke, her raspy voice easily reaching all across the arena. It sounded friendly enough, as well as strangely familiar for some reason. "I am Ascended Morgan of Clan Valor. Congratulations, warrior. Ah, what a splendid duel it was. You truly are a worthy winner." Sonny stared at her for a moment, then bowed his head slightly, expressing his respect, well, pretending to. Smiling in response, Morgan of Valor continued. "And you are truly worthy of wielding a memory forged by the smiths of the great clan Valor. In fact, your remarkable skill brought me so much joy that I have decided to gift you one of my personal armaments." Jackpot! The thing Sonny had hoped would happen did, indeed, happen. Ascended Morgan seemed to be in a very good mood. Whatever it was that a master of one of the great clans had in her arsenal was bound to be good. The young woman waited for the excited cheers of the crowd to quiet down and looked at him with a curious smile. "Tell me, what do you wish to receive? A weapon?" "Yes, a weapon would be great." Sonny started to smile, but then suddenly his eyes widened. "Crap!" And before he could think of a crafty lie, the flaw forced an answer out of his mouth. "No. Crap, 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 cursed." Morgan of Valor tilted her head a little. "A suit of armor, then, or maybe a powerful charm." "Yes, yes, both would be good." Sonny gritted his teeth, but the result was inevitable. He had no choice but to answer in a hollow voice. "Neither." The young woman laughed. "Really? Maybe you want to receive an echo then." "Oh no." Mongrel remained silent for several seconds, and then answered. "I do not." Sonny was on the verge of shedding bloody tears. How had it all gone so wrong, so fast? Master Morgan studied him for a bit, then leaned on the parapet and asked in an amused voice. "Really? What do you want then?" Sonny panicked. He obviously wanted to receive one of the rewards she had mentioned, but it was precisely because he did that Weaver's mask would not allow him to say it. He scrambled to salvage the situation and get at least something out of this disaster. Suddenly, a crazy idea appeared in his mind. And then, in front of countless thousands of people, Mongrel said something shocking. "You, Ascended Morgan, I want to duel you." A stunned silence settled over the resplendent arena. A sea of spectators was staring at Sonny with wide eyes, not sure if they had heard it right. Even the saint seemed shocked and uncertain about what to do. Surely, Mongrel had not just challenged a master of the great clan Valor to a fight. In that silence, a bright laughter suddenly rang, rolling over the vast courtyard. It was Morgan. She was laughing with a delighted expression on her face, her striking vermilion eyes full of mirth and amusement. A few moments later, she looked down and asked, her raspy voice relaxed and steady. "Oh, really? You want to fight me?" Sonny stared at her from below and nodded. "Yes." But of course, he didn't. He might have been a little bit crazy, but not nearly crazy enough to wish to fight an Ascended serving one of the sovereigns. Hell, that Morgan girl could have been Anvil's own daughter, for all Sonny knew. However, the fact that he would rather avoid such a confrontation didn't mean that fighting Morgan would be of no benefit to him. In fact, Sonny felt that it could push him to finally mastering the second step of shadow dance. A member of a great clan had to have a lot to teach him. Plus, who knows? If I win, she might give me the reward anyway. Anything else would just look petty. So, even if Sonny was against the idea, it was the best bad idea he had managed to come up with. As for how he was supposed to win against a master, that depended on Morgan herself. If Sonny was right, she would not unleash her full power on him, be it out of pride, a sense of fairness, or simply to save face. The young woman, meanwhile, was still looking at him from above. Her scarlet lips were curved into a slight smile. Such an audacious wish. She leaned back, and in the next moment the crowd gasped. Morgan of Valor easily jumped over the parapet and plunged down, soon landing on the floor of the arena dozens of meters below. A whirlwind of rose petals rose into the air from the force of the impact, but the young woman herself seemed unperturbed. She simply straightened and walked towards Sonny with the same easy smile. He instantly tensed. Curses she actually accepted. Until then, Sonny still had hoped that Morgan would refuse his daring request. But she seemed pleased by it instead. Stopping opposite Sonny, the young woman studied him for a bit and then glanced back at the tribune. "Venerable Thane, if you would." The bewildered saint remained silent for a few moments and then cleared their throat. Yes, of course." Almost immediately, the pleasant voice announced, "Challenger Morgan has entered the arena. Morgan has challenged Mongrel." She smiled, then turned back to Sonny. "That's better." Morgan studied him for a moment and then shook her head. "No, that won't work. As an Ascended, I can't expect an Awakened, even one as skilled and distinguished as you, to really have a chance in a duel against me. What shall we do?" She thought for a bit and then smiled again. I have an idea." With that, her dark armor and vermilion cape suddenly disintegrated into a torrent of scarlet sparks. The young woman was left standing in a simple black tunic, her feet bare. She then proceeded to hide one hand behind her back and summoned an unremarkable straight sword into the other. "I will only use one hand and a dormant weapon. 1 minute. If you survive against me for 1 minute, the win will be yours. That should be fair." Sonny scowled behind the mask. Isn't she too full of herself? What an arrogant and pretty, what an arrogant woman. No matter how he felt about it, Morgan's offer was exactly what Sonny had wanted. This way, he really stood a chance. Even better, there was no need to augment himself with shadows and reveal more of his strength. He just had to fight for 60 seconds and try to learn as much as he could in that short time. And if he happens to win, maybe the prize would still be his. Lowering the soul serpent, Sunny stared at his ascended opponent and calmly asked, "Shall we start?" Her smile widened. "Your wish is my command, my Lord Mongrel. Although, a piece of advice for the future, you should really be careful what you wish for." Just a moment later, Sunny realized that 60 seconds were going to be an eternity. What the hell, is she even Huma crap? Sunny didn't have words to describe how monstrous Morgan was. It was obvious that she held back and did not use all of her strength, but even then, he was instantly overwhelmed. The young woman in a simple black tunic was just too swift, nimble, and skilled. She read his movements as if he was an open book and easily demolished his defense, raining a barrage of strikes on the onyx surface of the mantle of the underworld. Even though her sword was too weak to break the adamantine armor, each blow carried enough might behind it to make Sunny shudder, and for flashes of sharp pain to radiate through his entire body. He was certain that his bones would have already cracked if it wasn't for the bone weave. He tasted blood. What's worse, Morgan of Valor had no blemishes on her mentality, as Dar of the Maharana clan or Queen Bee had. She was as vicious and ruthless as he himself was, maybe even more so. A born killer. And while Sunny barely had a couple of years of battle experience, she was an older and much more terrifying beast. She was tempered, her skill was forged and sharpened by thousands of bloody battles, that much was obvious. Just a few seconds later, he was already barely staying alive. Curse it, how I am supposed to survive that? Feeling his flesh break apart and his heart grow cold, Sunny scrambled to defend himself, but to no avail. Morgan easily crushed his attempts to resist and delivered another series of devastating strikes, moving with terrifying precision and speed. Her movements were fluid and natural, as if wielding a weapon was as innate to her as breathing. As if battle was her native environment instead of peace. Her swordsmanship was unlike anything Sunny had ever seen, too. It wasn't even as though the sword served as an extension of Morgan's arm. It was as though she herself was the sword, and so every motion she made was the purest expression of cold, merciless killing intent. He had never thought that he would meet a more terrifying swordsman than Nephi's, but compared to this knight of valor, the daughter of the immortal Flame clan almost seemed like a novice. Sunny was instantly overwhelmed, and there was nothing he could do to maintain even a sliver of control. The situation was utterly hopeless. This feeling of absolute bitter powerlessness, he had not experienced it in a long time. Attain a breakthrough to the second step of Shadow Dance. Sunny wasn't even sure that he would be able to stay alive for another couple of seconds. He had to think of something fast. Following a mental command, the mantle of the underworld received one of his charms. Immediately, the familiar but strongly enhanced pain of his soul being torn apart flooded his whole being with agony. Sunny didn't hope that the broken oath would help him defeat Morgan. After all, as an ascended, she had a much more powerful soul. All he wanted was a second of respite. Morgan suddenly slowed down, allowing him to disengage and take several steps back. For a moment, there was a slight grimace on her face, but it was quickly replaced by the same relaxed, amused smile. A nice trick. Sunny bent slightly and vomited a mouthful of blood, thin streams of crimson flowing through the fangs of the black mask. The sight of it was both frightening and striking. When he straightened, something about him changed. Well, of course it did. He had commanded two shadows resting on the autumn lead to wrap themselves around his body after all. Instantly, his strength, speed, and resilience tripled. Sunny had not wanted to augment himself before, but faced with the devastating onslaught of the terrifying battle master, he had no other choice. If he wished to learn anything from this fight, he had to make it last more than just a few seconds. Morgan noticed the subtle shift in his posture and tilted her head slightly. Her smile suddenly widened. Good, this is much better. Sunny dismissed the broken oath, but before the charm even had time to disappear, the young woman was already upon him once again in a whirlwind of ruthless steel. However, this time, things were different. Or rather, slightly different. What the actual hell? Sunny was still hopelessly outmatched, barely managing to survive under the merciless barrage of lightning-fast, cruel attacks. Previously, he had judged that his peak physical might would be on par with a newly ascended master. Even though Sunny wasn't currently using the third shadow, it had to remain on the ground to keep his secrets. The gap between Morgan and him was not supposed to remain that vast. But there was a mistake in his reasoning. He had compared himself to an average master, however. Morgan of Valor was not average in any way. She hailed from one of the three great clans, and was possibly even a member of its core family. Among the awakened, she was a being at the absolute apex of might. Come on! And yet, he was able to do something now, at least. Even though Morgan was still dominating the fight, and delivering one devastating blow after another, Sunny could perceive her movements and react. He dodged one strike, then deflected another. A third one still connected with his elbow, sending a blinding flash of pain through his body, but it was already an incredible achievement. Morgan seemed pleased by this new development. Her crimson lips curved, revealing pearly white teeth. Yes, finally, you are supposed to be a genius, aren't you? Show me, come on, fight. What the hell is wrong with this girl? Sunny gritted his teeth and fought, barely staying alive. No matter how much he pushed himself, how much he struggled to keep up with the fearsome master, all he could achieve was not being instantly obliterated. But that was it. Even with two shadows augmenting his body, Sunny saw no hope of winning, despite the fact that Morgan was holding back her strength. She was simply a monster. No, she was something much more terrible. He had faced and killed many monsters, many demons, and many devils, but none of them could compare to this beautiful, horrifying young woman. However, even if he was going to lose, it was all not in vain. With every blow he suffered, every strike he somehow defended against, Sunny was learning. Morgan's battle style was too elevated for him to grasp, but every glimpse of it he saw was fueling something inside of him. It was as though he had laid a solid foundation by absorbing numerous styles, and now they were being forged into something different, something whole by the insane pressure fighting this monstrous creature exerted on him. His body felt as if it was on the verge of breaking apart, and his vision was slowly becoming blurred. But Sunny felt. He felt as though he was on the verge of a revelation. And when it came, it was as though a floodgate was opened in his mind. Suddenly, all the disparate fragments of knowledge he had absorbed formed into a cohesive tapestry, allowing him to see the shared logic between the various styles he had learned. He was able to perceive these styles from a new perspective, understanding not only their purpose, but also much of the reasoning behind each technique and movement much deeper. Yes, this is it. And due to this new level of insight, Sunny was also able to see a flaw in Morgan's assault, her one and only weakness. Yes, the young woman herself was too powerful and skilled for him to destroy, but her sword, that was a different matter. It was just a dormant memory after all. Instantly, a plan formed in his mind. As time seemed to slow down, Sunny deflected another blow, shifted his body slightly, and then suddenly took a step toward the flashing sword, catching its blade between his left arm and his torso, and then bringing his right fist on it. He put all of his strength behind it, increasing the weight of his gauntlet as much as he could at the last moment. All his muscles strained, on the verge of exploding. After numerous clashes against the adamantine surface of the mantle of the underworld, the sword was weakened already. So when Sunny's fist connected with it, the steel blade simply shattered, exploding into numerous sharp splinters. And got you. Burning with dark excitement, Sonny continued his movement, aiming to bring the soul serpent down on now defenseless Morgan before she had time to process what had happened and adjust. But before he could, terrible pain suddenly exploded in his chest, and all strength left his hands. The hilt of the odachi slid from his fingers, and the dark sword silently fell to the ground. Sonny swayed, and then looked down in confusion. What happened? What he saw didn't make any sense. Morgan's pale, slender hand was protruding from his armor, blood streaming down the smooth onyx surface. She had pierced the mantle of the underworld with her bare hand, her fingers plunging through flesh and bone to tear his heart apart. Sonny had made a mistake. How is this possible? Ascended memory sixth tier. He looked up, darkness shrouding his vision. Is this what it feels like to die? Everything was dark, and all he could see now were two beautiful vermilion eyes, staring at him with regret and disappointment. Morgan sighed. 36 seconds. Well done, you fought well. The last thing Sonny felt before slipping into nothingness was a spark of energy traveling from her hand into his body. And then he found himself in the black void of the dreamscape. His pain disappeared, as did his wounds. He felt healthy and whole. The duel was over. As he stared into the darkness, the spell whispered quietly, "You have received a memory." But he didn't react, looking into the void with a heavy frown on his face. Somewhere above, near the set of images representing different arenas, a string of words floated. Mongrel. Victories, 935. Defeats, 1. Sonny shut down the illusion. The underground dojo was silent and submerged in darkness, almost like the lightless expanse of his soul. Crawling out of the dreamscape pod, he glanced at it, and then walked to the middle of the hall. There, he sat down on the cold ceramic plates of the floor, crossed his legs and closed his eyes. Back in the illusory world created by the will of an eccentric saint, the tournament was coming to an end. There were spectacles, festivities, and accolades being given to the winners, but he didn't care. He didn't care about the legend of Mongrel, either. Sonny had no doubt that his inexplicable refusal of the final reward and daring challenge had created quite a stir. Were people praising Mongrel for his resolve and ambition, or mocking his defeat and calling him a fool? In any case, the network must have been boiling right now. Sonny couldn't be bothered to check. He had much more important concerns. There was the final reward he had received, given to him by Morgan of Valor despite his failure. As well as previous rewards, he had no time to study well. And there was Shadow Dance. This was what he had to concentrate on now. Sitting in the darkness with his eyes closed, Sonny thought back to the revelation he had received during the battle with the monstrous master and started to slowly digest it. He had the key now. All that remained was to absorb it, turn it from a fleeting feeling into an inseparable part of his mind, body, and soul. That was going to take some time. Fragments of Morgan's battle will help him find unity in the discordant collection of battle styles he had amassed. His comprehension of the fundamental, governing principles of battle techniques was vastly elevated, allowing him to understand them on a deeper level. This enlightenment was going to help Sonny grasp various styles much faster, as well as mirror more complex and sophisticated battle arts with ease. At this level, he needed to be able to recognize patterns of essence control from how the enemies moved, breathed, and attacked. The new understanding was going to help with that too. He just had to assimilate it all. Time slowly passed. Sonny continued to meditate, making slow progress toward his goal. After a while, his thoughts began to wander. The dream tournament gave Sonny much more than he had expected. Yes, there were powerful memories and a breakthrough in his comprehension of Shadow Dance, but there was also something else, different but no less valuable. Fighting the best of the best that the dreamscape had to offer had helped him to put his own prowess into perspective. Facing formidable champions one after another showed Sonny just how much more powerful and experienced than them he was. Sonny was always comparing himself to Nephi's and inevitably finding himself falling short. He chased after her with desperate resolve, but was never able to catch up. Mongrel might have been only defeated once, but Sonny had been defeated countless times. He lived in the shadow of constant failure. But it was exactly because he had been chasing after Changing Star without rest that he had left everyone else in the dust without even noticing. Now that he had a chance to look back, Sonny finally saw just how wide the gap between himself and all the rest of the Awakened had become. It was so wide that he had been able to cut the best of them down while barely using a quarter of his power. Back on the Forgotten Shore, Sonny had learned a simple truth. If one wanted to better themselves, they had to challenge those who were stronger than them. Nothing was more beneficial to one's growth than fighting against a superior opponent. That was why and how he had transformed himself into a lethal killer in the span of a single year. And even though Sonny had not understood it before, using Nephi's as a reference point achieved the same result, even if the goal of surpassing her often seemed bitterly unattainable. He had come far by struggling to do so against all odds, so far. He saw it clearly now, but he also saw how much further he had to walk. Just as fighting the participants of the Dream Tournament had shown him his strength, fighting Morgan had shown him his weakness. Yes, Sonny was incredibly powerful for an Awakened of his age, but there were other giants out there, no less terrifying than him. They were older, stronger, and had years of battle experience and vast resources that he lacked. In front of them, Sonny was like an ant. A subtle smile appeared on his face. Or maybe like a cockroach. Morgan was a master of the great clan valor, and as such, she was a peak existence among those below the level of a saint. She was kin to one of the sovereigns, so he could use her as a benchmark to know what was the worst he could expect. Another reference point to strive for, one more superior opponent to temper himself against. One day in the future, they might have to cross swords again, and when that happened, he knew that her vermilion eyes would not end up full of disappointment again. Instead, they would be full of fear. All these thoughts traveled idly at the edges of his consciousness, while most of his mind was occupied by absorbing the key to the second step of Shadow Dance. And just as that last thought disappeared, he finally felt that the process was complete. A moment later, the silence of the underground dojo was suddenly destroyed by the voice of the spell. Sonny flinched, not accustomed to hearing it in the real world, let alone inside his home. The spell said, "Your aspect legacy mastery level has increased. You have received the right to claim a legacy relic. Your shadow has evolved." Sonny waited for a few moments and then hurriedly stood up while summoning the runes. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. After so much time, all the sweat and blood, his effort had finally paid off. He had made another step toward becoming a true battle master. All it took was... Sonny thought for a second, then glanced at the runes describing the mantle of the underworld first. Under the description of the Prince of the Underworld enchantment, a runic counter glowed. Vanquished foes, 2,332/6,000. All it took was killing 1,200 enemies with his own 2 hands, and dying by a master's hand once. Around 900 of those kills had happened in the dreamscape, 1 in the waking world, and the rest in front of the gate and in the wild reaches of the Chained Isles. Sadly, creatures slain by Saint did not count toward the requirement of the strange enchantment, or the number would have been even higher. Still, it was good progress. Turning away, Sonny found the string of runes he wanted to see the most. Shadow's Marble Saint, Soul Serpent. He concentrated on the latter and read. Shadow Soul Serpent. Shadow rank awakened. A wide grin appeared on his face. Sonny closed his eyes and listened to his soul, then circulated shadow essence through the coils of the serpent. He could feel that it was flowing even faster than before. The rate of essence expenditure and regeneration was also improved. Perfect. He had expected the process of evolving to a new rank to take a long time, like it had happened with Saint back on the Forgotten Shore. But Soul Serpent had awakened instantly after he had reached the second level of mastery over the Shadow Dance, maybe due to its unique nature as an aspect legacy relic. What else changed, I wonder? Sonny opened his eyes and looked back to the runes. He had already noticed that there were new ones in the description of the shadow. Shadow attributes, shadow guide, soul weapon, soul beast. The soul beast wasn't there before. He concentrated on the new attribute and read. Attribute description. Soul serpent can assume the form of a beast. Sonny blinked a couple of times. What? He looked down at his bare chest and stared at the intricate tattoo of a black serpent that coiled around his torso and arms. Then, Sonny carefully raised one hand and gave the shadow a mental command. Immediately, the tattoo moved, slithering onto his palm and moving down his fingers. However, instead of the tip of a sharp blade, a triangular head of a massive snake appeared in the air instead. Enveloped in streaming darkness, the serpent crawled forward, leaving Sonny's skin and manifesting itself into existence. Its jet-black scales rustled quietly as they touched the armored plates of the floor, and soon, petrified Sonny was looking at a giant snake, at least 6 meters in length, its body as wide as a large man's arm and strong enough to crush granite into dust. The Stygian creature coiled its long body and stretched into the air, its head slowly rising and soon reaching as high as Sonny was tall. A forked tongue flashed for a moment, and then the serpent looked him right in the eyes. Then it opened its maw and hissed, revealing long, terrifying onyx fangs. Sonny gulped. The serpent's eyes were as black as its mighty body and shone with dark radiance. They seemed as deep as the lightless expanse of an ocean of shadows and were full of strange, alien intelligence. Luckily, there was no aggression or ill will in them. Instead, there was simply recognition. The shadow serpent was greeting its master. Sonny slowly looked away and studied the dark creature's body. Then, he sent the creepy shadow forward, and it swiftly wrapped itself around the serpent. Immediately, flowing patterns that were somehow even darker than the lusterless, obsidian scales revealed themselves, and the pressure that the shadow beast exerted instantly became much more frightening. Its body had turned ghostly, enveloped in wisps of impenetrable, moving darkness. Sonny hesitated for a moment and then grinned. "What a good boy you are." Very satisfied, he glanced at the giant snake and then patted it on the head with a delighted expression on his face. Now it was the mighty beast's turn to blink, if it had any eyelids. Was Sonny imagining things, or did the obsidian serpent seem a bit startled by such treatment? With a shrug, he glanced back at the runes and lowered his gaze. There was one last surprise left for him to discover. At the very bottom, several new runes appeared. Shadow abilities, Serpentine Steel, Soul Reaver. Soul Reaver, ability description. A portion of the soul essence of those slain by the shadow serpent in its soul weapon or soul beast form is absorbed and transferred to its master. Sonny's smile widened. Excellent, that will help with the fact that I can't use the serpent to regenerate essence while it is not on my body. In fact, as long as it continues to kill something, my essence might never run dry. He glanced at the shadow with gleaming eyes. You and I are going to do great things together, buddy. You'll have plenty of tasty souls to eat, don't worry. Saying that, Sonny opened his palm and commanded the serpent to crawl back onto his skin. A few seconds later, the shadow had already turned back into a tattoo and coiled itself around his body. It was as though there had never been a terrifying creature in the underground dojo in the first place. Now let's take a look at that relic. Sunny looked at the runes and found the right cluster. Aspect Legacy, Shadow Dance. Shadow Dance Mastery Level 2/7. First relic claimed. Second relic claim. Third relic unearned. Concentrating on the second relic, Sunny said confidently, "Claim." For a second nothing happened. Sunny waited, full of anticipation. What could it be? Another shadow, a weapon, an armor, maybe a charm or a tool or something more unexpected, a new attribute perhaps. And then, answering his call, the spell spoke from the darkness. "You have claimed an Aspect Legacy relic. You have received a memory." Sunny hurriedly glanced at the runes describing his memories, searching for a new one. A moment later, when he saw it, his heart skipped a beat, and he momentarily forgot how to breathe. Out there in the darkness of the underground dojo, several familiar runes shone with ethereal light. They read, "Memory Drop of Ichor." Sunny held his breath, staring at the runes intensely. He knew what that memory was. Another drop of divine blood. And knowing where the shadow slave aspect had come from, and to which deity it was connected, it wasn't hard to guess whose blood it was. Shadow God. This memory was of a drop of Shadow God's blood. And in that drop was his lineage. Can't be. But it was. Sunny had just received a second lineage memory. More than that, that lineage was a complete one, like the fire, that Neff had inherited from Sun God, not a fragment of a forbidden bloodline that he had inherited from Weaver, the demon of fate. Sunny studied the runes for a while, then slowly turned away. He wasn't ready to summon the drop of Ichor yet, not because of the pain that consuming a lineage memory would bring. Who knew? Maybe there wasn't going to be any this time. After all, this one was not forbidden. He simply had to prepare himself mentally. Sunny paced for a bit, then sat down and meditated for some time. Then he decided to study the memories he had received in the tournament to distract himself. He had already studied the memory of ice in detail, so 3 more remained. The arrow, the shield, and the final reward he had received from Morgan, the memory created in the forge of the great clan Valor. The real reason he had joined the dream tournament in the first place. Sunny hesitated for a moment, then looked at the list of his memories. Memories: Silver Bell, Puppeteer's Shroud, Midnight Shard, Ordinary Rock, Prowling Thorn, Endless Spring, Blood Blossom, Darkwing, Moonlight Shard, Mantle of the Underworld, Weaver's Mask, Broken Oath, Blackhorn Bow, Full Quiver, Autumn Leaf, Cruel Sight, Covetous Coffer, Undying Chain, Heavenly Burden, Memory of Fire, Memory of Ice, Strike of Thunder, Patient Avenger, Morgan's Warbow, Drop of Ichor. So it's a bow, but what's up with that name? Well, it made sense, actually. If this was really a custom memory created for a specific user, then why wouldn't its name fit theirs? Sunny concentrated on the arrow first. Memory Strike of Thunder. Memory Rank Ascended. Memory Tier II. Memory Type Weapon. Memory Description: a powerful spirit was once trapped in a glass bottle for 1,000 years. This lightning is a manifestation of his rage. Memory Enchantments: Caged Lightning. Enchantment Description: this arrow strikes as fast as a bolt of lightning and chains its devastating damage to several nearby creatures. He grunted. So, lightning in a bottle, huh? Even though the arrow's single enchantment was an active one and required a lot of essence to access, which meant that it couldn't be used often, the effect was very good. It was able to deal damage to groups of enemies, which could come in handy in many situations. Satisfied, he shifted his gaze to the shield. Memory Patient Avenger. Memory Rank Ascended. Memory Tier III. Memory Type Weapon. Memory Description: Aflame with hatred, she waited and watched. When the time came, her vengeance was colder than ice. Memory enchantments, tenacious, burning heart, cold steel. Tenacious enchantment description. This shield is especially durable. Burning heart, enchantment description. This shield can store a portion of fire damage it receives to augment another weapon of its wielder or unleash a devastating shockwave. Cold steel, enchantment description. This shield can store a portion of impact damage it receives to augment another weapon of its wielder or unleash an immolating wave of fire. Sunny thought for a bit. So this shield was basically able to convert heat to kinetic energy, and vice versa. The stored energy could be used to enhance another weapon or released all at once to deliver a powerful attack, which meant that the more hits the shield received, the more devastating the resulting retaliation would be. Saint was long overdue for a good shield memory, and this one would suit her very well. A weak smile appeared on Sunny's face. And finally, the main prize. He sighed, then concentrated on the bow he had received from ascended Morgan of Clan Valor. He also summoned it. A composite bow made out of black horn and dark polished wood manifested itself from a storm of crimson sparks. It was entirely black, however. Its string was of a vibrant scarlet color. There was also a brand carved into one of its limbs near the grip, its contour of the same color as the string. It depicted the crest of the Valor family, a straight sword thrust through an iron anvil. The bow was quite beautiful, but more importantly, it radiated a feeling of immense power. Sunny admired the weapon for a few moments, and then turned back to the runes. Memory, Morgan's warbow. Memory rank ascended. Memory tier, IV. Memory type, weapon. Memory description, death is worth living for, love is worth waiting for. How romantic and how morbid. Sunny didn't know who created this description, the spell itself or the person who had forged the bow. If it was the latter, then maybe this was a message to Morgan, or a lesson the spellsmith wanted to impart to her. But what kind of a lesson was that? Curious, Sunny looked beneath the surface of the black bow, wishing to see if the spellweave of a memory created by a human was different from that created by the spell. However, it seemed pretty much the same, vast, inconceivably complex, and eerily beautiful. In any case, he was excited to see that this memory was of the 4th tier. It was powerful indeed, no less powerful than the cruel sight. Encouraged, he continued to read the runes. Memory enchantments, soul arrows, unbending, burden of peace, death dealer. 4 enchantments, first 2 are passive, the other 2 are active, not bad. He concentrated on the first enchantment. Soul arrows, enchantment description. This bow attunes to the soul of its wielder and is capable of creating arrows that share its affinity. Unbending, enchantment's description. This adamantine bow demands a giant's might to be bent. Because of that, arrows shot from it travel as far as the eye can see and strike with terrible strength, piercing both armor and flesh. The passive enchantments were not bad, to say the least. Sunny wasn't sure what arrows that shared the affinity of his soul could do, but the fact that the bow itself could produce an unlimited amount of arrows was already a great boon. It basically made the full quiver, his previous arrow-type memory, pale in comparison and completely redundant. Each of the soul arrows would also share the tier and rank of the warbow that created them, which was simply incredible. To test it, Sunny grabbed the string and tried to draw the warbow. Even with all his strength, Sunny was only able to do it after augmenting himself with 2 shadows. As soon as the string moved, a black arrow that looked as if it was made out of solidified shadows suddenly appeared on it. Sunny released the string, and in the next moment, one of the armored plates on the opposite wall exploded. Crap! He stared at the broken plate dejectedly, then sighed and looked back to the runes. Burden of peace, Enchantment description. After soul arrows pierce the flesh of an enemy, their weight can be drastically increased. Interesting. Sunny could already think of several useful applications for this enchantment, be it to make wounds dealt by the arrows more severe or simply to slow the enemy down. There was one last string of runes left. Death Dealer, enchantment description. This bow is able to consume a large amount of essence to deliver an obliterating strike. That sounded ominous. Sunny was curious to know how obliterating exactly that strike was supposed to be, but he was not going to test it in his dojo. It already suffered enough. Morgan's warbow was indeed a weapon worthy of an ascended knight from a great clan. It was a truly formidable and versatile weapon. In any other circumstance, Sunny would have been mad from joy after receiving it. And he was sort of. But there was one more memory he had to deal with. It was time. He couldn't postpone it anymore. Sunny glanced at the beautiful bow for the last time, then sighed and dismissed it. As soon as the flood of scarlet sparks disappeared, he summoned the drop of ichor. The underground dojo was submerged in darkness, and as soon as Sunny willed the drop of ichor to manifest itself into reality, that darkness suddenly came to life. Countless shadows moved and danced around him, forming an invisible whirlpool. Their movements were strange and erratic, fraught with anticipation, excitement, and longing. Slowly, golden sparks of light appeared in the air in front of him and then shot toward a single point in space, coalescing into a small, radiant dot. However, the memory did not appear yet. Instead, more and more sparks flew into it, thousands upon thousands of them, until at last it seemed as though wide streams of brilliant golden light were constantly flowing into the slowly growing sphere of radiance. This continued for almost an entire minute, and when the sparks finally disappeared, a brilliant drop of golden liquid was floating in the air in front of Sunny. It was suffused with a beautiful light that didn't seem blinding, but was somehow able to illuminate the entire expanse of the dojo. However, there was also something dark about the shining drop of divine blood, contrasted against its golden radiance. The shadows around him were now suddenly much deeper, darker, and starkly pronounced. All their movement ceased, as though they were frozen still by awe and reverence. That is Shadow God's blood, all right. Sunny forced himself to look away from the drop of ichor and summoned the runes describing it. He had to make sure that his guess was right. Tense with anticipation, he read, Memory drop of ichor. Memory rank unknown. Memory tier unknown. Memory type unknown. Just like the last time. Not surprised, he lowered his gaze and studied the string of runes that were his real goal. Memory description. Before there was only boundless, eternal void. From that dark abyss they were born. Just like chaos itself, they were endless and everlasting, vast and forever changing. But then came desire, and with it came direction. From it the gods were born. When gods appeared, the void was not eternal anymore. When gods appeared, the darkness was not endless anymore. When gods appeared, the chaos was not orderless anymore. The gods appeared and brought with them war. This drop of divine blood was spilled by Shadow on one of the battlefields of that war, before the void was bound. Sunny stared at the runes, flabbergasted. That was a lot to take in. So, unlike the unknown, they were indeed a type of creatures, primordial beings that existed before time, space, and even death itself in a boundless dark void, and the gods were different from them, but also their kin. At least it was clear now what terrible enemy the gods had faced long before the demons and their rebellion, and why Shadow God had been compelled to create death. How else would they be able to defeat eternal creatures? Were time, space, and other concepts Sunny had always thought to be absolute also created as weapons in the war of the gods against the? At least it was easy to tell which side had emerged victorious. However, The most frightening detail was that the description never said that the primordial void had been destroyed, only that it had been bound. Was it still bound, now that the gods were dead? Sonny shivered and shook his head. The short description contained a vast amount of information, which had an even vaster amount of implications. He couldn't encompass all that in a small span of time. Maybe after I consume the drop, I'll learn more. He hesitated, then glanced at the radiant drop of golden liquid once again. Immediately the spell spoke. This time, however, its voice did not sound subtly excited. Weird. You have acquired a drop of ichor. Do you wish to consume it? Sonny sighed, remembering the agony of the previous 2 times he had decided to snack on a piece of divinity. Then he gritted his teeth and said, Yes, so be it. What is that supposed to? The golden drop suddenly separated into 3 equal parts, which then shot toward his chest, abdomen, and head. The radiant droplets entered his 3 shadow cores and disappeared, dissolving into the darkness of his soul. Sonny flinched. Already. The shadows surrounding him exploded with motion, and at the same time, the darkness inside of him seethed. He felt something entering his bloodstream, a cold and unfamiliar energy that brought with it both pain and euphoria. This is it, it's starting. He lowered himself to the floor, preparing for the torturous process of transformation. The cold energy spread through his entire body, reaching every corner of it. It surged, on the cusp of assimilating into the very essence of his being. And then something strange happened. Sonny opened his eyes wide in shock and horror. As the lineage of Shadow God flowed through his veins, blood weave suddenly surged too. But its behavior was not at all normal or caused by Sonny himself. It was acting of its own volition and felt full of ominous, dark intent. And hunger. What? He was prepared for indescribable pain, but the pain never came. Instead, he could feel the cold energy being hungrily and ruthlessly devoured by the blood weave, like it had been starving for thousands of years. What the hell is happening? A sudden spasm ran through his body, and Sonny fell down with a short yelp. Inside of him, 2 forces were fighting for control over his very being. One was the lineage of Shadow God, and the other was blood weave. And despite the fact that one was complete and came from an actual divinity, while the other was fragmented and incomplete, the forbidden inheritance of Weaver was winning. It was like a savage beast that sunk its teeth into the soft flesh of its prey and refused to let go. Stop, what are you? And before he knew it, it was all over. The cold energy of Shadow God's lineage was gone, and blood weave was back to its usual self, peaceful once again, as if nothing had happened. Peaceful but yet stronger. As Sonny stared into the darkness in absolute shock, there was no announcement of him acquiring a new attribute. Instead, the spell said, with a hint of dark satisfaction in its voice, Blood weave has evolved. Bone weave has evolved. Ember of divinity has evolved. Your memory has been destroyed. Sonny remained silent for a long time, and then let out a furious, outraged scream. Weaver, you! The autumn was in full swing. Out in the waking world, the skies were gray and the winds were turning cold. The trees were showering the wet ground with a fragrant carpet of dead leaves. But under the boundless, lethal expanse of the sky above, the world was still warm and bright. On an especially large island, one covered with emerald grass and moss-covered ruins, a frightening nightmare creature was stalking its prey. It had 4 mighty paws, a lean body covered in black fur, and a wide maw full of sharp fangs. Above it, 2 furious red eyes burned with hatred and madness. The abomination noiselessly moved through the tall grass, approaching the source of loud noise. A human's voice was screaming, full of indignation. I'm right here. Come and get me, damned bastards, curse you all. The creature snarled and prepared to jump. Before it could, however, a slender arrow fell from the sky and hit the abomination right in the eye, instantly killing it. You have slain a fallen beast, Black Ravager. Your shadow grows stronger. Several hundred meters away, safely hidden in the shadows cast by a fragment of an ancient wall, Sonny lowered his bow and frowned. The happy shadow jumped up and down several times, then turned to him and applauded. Sonny looked at it, his frown turning into a scowl. "What do you mean, great shot? I was aiming for its leg, you idiot." Dejectedly shaking his head, he threw the bow on the ground and growled. It had been almost 2 months since the day he had gained, and promptly lost, the lineage of Shadow God, but Sonny's mood was still in shambles. He had spent most of this time training Rain and learning how to use a bow. By now, his aim wasn't terrible, but it was also not nearly as impressive as what he had seen Kai do. The fact that his archery was improving so slowly only added to Sonny's frustration. He wasn't using Morgan's warbow, of course, reluctant to be seen with a memory awarded to Mongrel. Even if no one except for the terrifying master knew what exactly that memory was, people could recognize the brand of clan valor on its surface, which would lead to a lot of questions. Instead, Sonny was training with the Blackhorn bow, which Saint had used to wield back when he had been too weak to handle nightmare creatures populating the chained isles without her support. Sonny stared at the bow in question and suppressed the desire to give it a good kick. Dismissing it with a sigh, he retrieved the cruel sight from where it had been thrust into the ground and headed in the direction of the slain abomination. Compared to when he had just arrived on the chained isles, Sonny was much stronger now. He had a vastly better arsenal of memories at his disposal, an additional shadow core and a third shadow, and his combat mastery was polished by hundreds upon hundreds of bloody battles. Additionally, after the damned and forbidden, rightfully so, lineage of Weaver had swallowed the drop of Shadow God's blood, 3 of his attributes evolved. The Ember of Divinity was now Flame of Divinity, raising his divine affinity even more, which also increased the durability of the undying chain. Blood Weave and Bone Weave had not changed in name, but became much more potent. Sonny was now much harder to break and kill. He probably couldn't bleed to death even if he wanted to, and it would take a saint or someone like Master Morgan to shatter his bones again. That was something, at least. Commanding the ordinary rock to shut up, he picked it up from the ground, hid it on his belt, and walked over to the carcass of the Black Ravager. The creepy shadow slowly turned its head and stared at the carcass with disturbing fascination. "This guy." Sonny rolled his eyes. "Don't just stand there, pervert, come here and help." The shadow eagerly wrapped itself around the blade of the prowling thorn, which was then used to cut the tough hide of the dead nightmare creature. Sonny swiftly fished out the soul shard and threw it to the covetous coffer, which hopped into the air and swallowed it with a metallic click. Usually, that would be it, but today Sonny needed to retrieve something else as well. Grimacing from time to time, he cut several large slabs of meat off the carcass, wrapped them, and threw the bundle over his shoulder. Should be enough, right? Finally done with the gruesome task, he stood up, picked up the cruel sight, and headed toward the southern edge of the large island. This island was a bit special, and for a good reason. Once Sonny reached its end, he saw a breathtaking sight. Far away and below him, the scattering of floating isles was no more. Instead, solid ground stretched as far as the eye could see, covered by a patchwork of forests, meadows, marshes, rolling hills, and glistening ribbons of rushing rivers. A dark, bottomless abyss stretched between the edge of the island and the rest of the dream realm, and those rivers fell into it, creating grandiose waterfalls. Near to where he stood, a ruined fortress rose from the ground, and from its gates, a colossal iron chain, many times thicker than the giant chains connecting the isles together, extended into the abyss, connecting to the soil on the other side of the dark chasm. This was one of the anchors of the Chained Isles, and the road by which Awakened traveled here from the lands to the south, which belonged to the great clan Valor, as much as anything could belong to humans in this realm of nightmares. Sunny glanced at the sun, then got busy making a fire. By the time strips of meat were roasting over the coals, two figures finally appeared on the colossal chain. A small smile appeared on Sunny's face, one of the few sincere ones he had shown in the past 2 months. Effie and Kai had finally reached the Chained Isles. Now all of them were here. Effie and Kai climbed over the rubble of the shattered gateway and entered the crumbled fortress. Both were tired and covered in layers of dirt, their armors dented and their weapons nicked. The travel to the very edge of the explored lands had not been easy. Even though they had made stops and rested at human citadels along the way, it took a lot of strength, endurance, resolve, and a bit of luck to reach the Chained Isles alive. However, both raised by wolves and Nightingale were calm and vigilant, their eyes sharp, their hands steady. They were ready to face any danger. Luckily, there were no enemies inside the ruin. Instead, several nightmare creatures lay dead on the ground, some of them cut to pieces, some strangely lacking any wounds, but utterly broken, as though something terrifyingly powerful had crushed their bodies with inhuman strength. The shadows suddenly moved, and a split second later, Kai already had his bow drawn. However, Effie gestured for him to lower it. Out of the shadows, a tall and graceful figure in elaborate black armor stepped out, two ruby flames shining behind the visor of her helmet. In one hand, she wielded a steadfast kite shield forged out of dull steel, and in the other an austere sword, its blade still dripping with rancid blood of the slaughtered abominations. Kai cautiously studied the menacing creature. "Is that Sunny's echo? She looks different." Effie grinned. "Yeah, she does that sometimes. Hey there, beautiful, where's your sneaky master?" The taciturn demon tilted her head a little, stared at Effie for a few moments, then silently turned around and walked away. "I guess we should follow." The three of them left the crumbling fortress and walked along the edge of the island. Soon, the heavenly smell of roasting meat reached their nostrils. A few seconds later, both Effie and Kai froze, their mouths hanging open. A fire pit was built in the shadow of an ancient wall, strips of juicy, generously seasoned meat roasting over the coals. But that was not all. There were also fresh vegetables and succulent fruits, a copper seize producing the unmistakable smell of freshly brewed coffee, and a few more things that people very rarely saw in the dream realm. The person responsible for all this revelry was sitting in a comfortable folding chair, lazily enjoying a slice of melon. When he saw them, an impish smile appeared on his face. "Oh, hi guys, you finally made it." With that, the young man jumped out of the chair, reached into a pot full of ice, and then placed 2 frosty bottles of cold, expensive beer into their hands. Sunny grinned. "Welcome to the Chained Isles." Sometime later, Effie and Kai had satiated their hunger and were resting with dreamy expressions on their faces. Sunny had given up his folding chair and was now sitting on the ground. He was inwardly lamenting the fact that covetous coffer was not large enough on the inside to fit several. At least not yet. Maybe after he becomes a master, things would be different. Kai took a sip of his beer and glanced at the branded bottle in his hand with a funny expression. "Sunny, how do you even have all this stuff? Are you on such good terms with the White Feather clan?" Sunny laughed. "Nope, I delivered all these things here myself. What, you have forgotten about my brilliant emporium already? It seems that Aiko had not hounded you for an endorsement hard enough, or maybe too hard, and you're suffering from trauma-induced amnesia. I mean, you are basically a co-founder. The first deal I ever made was with your help, remember?" Kai smiled. "Those terrible memories you asked me to buy on your behalf in the castle. Yeah, I do." Sunny nodded with enthusiasm. My operation might seem small compared to what you two have seen in Bastion, but here on the Chained Island, I am the most successful entrepreneur. I guess it's true what they say about business. You know, you have to find the right people in the right wells, or something like that. The charming Archer blinked a couple of times, but didn't comment. Effie, on the other hand, did. Finishing her beer, she glanced at the empty bottle with regret and sighed. Sonny, I have a serious question. Think about it before answering. Take your time, too. Will you marry me? No, seriously, I am reformed. I swear I won't tease you anymore. I won't even mind you having a girlfriend. Just continue supplying me with all this stuff. He sneered. No, denied, you shameless gold digger. Effie made a disappointed face, then threw her head back and laughed out loud. Oh well, all right then. Then she grew a little bit more serious and asked, so what's the plan? How do we proceed from here? Sonny sighed, then took out his map of the Chained Isles and placed it on the grass. Effie and Kai got closer and studied it attentively. He pointed to the southernmost point on the map and said, we are here. First things first, we need to get you to the sanctuary of Noctis, which is about 3 days of traveling away, and get you anchored there. White Feather Clan patrols this route routinely, so we shouldn't run into anything too troublesome. Then he pointed at a particular island, marked with an image of a burned tree. After you are settled, we'll go check up on the firekeepers and their progress on the ship. They won't be finished repairing that thing for at least a month more, from what I've heard, so you'll have to spend that time well. Hunt, saturate your cores as much as you can, search for better equipment. Effie nodded. What about you and Cassie? Are you well prepared? Sonny hesitated, then nodded. I am reasonably prepared. Cassie, I don't know, but the two of us have another task to accomplish before the ship is ready to set sail. He pointed to the very north of the Chained Isles, to a dark island that was almost touching the foreboding slopes of the Hollow Mountains. There is something we need to retrieve from the Night Temple. If all goes well, we'll travel north and come back within a month. If it takes longer, we will rendezvous here. His finger landed on the shipwreck island. And challenge the seed. That's the gist of it. Don't worry, though, we'll talk everything through in detail before Cassie and I leave. Effie and Kai glanced at each other. Sounds like a plan. Sonny nodded, then glanced at the setting sun. Good, rest well tonight then. We'll set off in the morning. Winter was drawing closer and closer. And the closer it got, the more nervous he became, on the way back to the sanctuary. Sonny tried to impart as much knowledge about the Chained Isles as he could to Kai and Effie. The Archer, in particular, needed to go through a tough adjustment. His main combat tool was his ability to fly, which was obviously restricted in this strange land. Looking at the clear blue sky with a bit of trepidation, Kai asked, so that crushing, how deadly is it? Sonny grimaced. Deadly enough to kill a saint, but it is also situational. After a bit, you'll develop a sense of how high or low the island you're standing on is. When it is at its lowest point, like right now, you will probably be able to rise several hundred meters into the air before feeling any pressure. The exact margin depends on how long the chains of the island are. He paused, then continued. However, when it is ascending or descending, you'd better either stay on the ground or not fly more than a dozen meters up. And if it has already reached the peak, well, you really should have already escaped to another island. But if you failed to do that in time, lay on the ground and pray. If the chains are short enough, you will survive. Kai studied the sky above some more, then looked down. What about below the islands? Can I fly freely there? Sonny nodded. Theoretically, yes. The sky below is generally safe, there's just nothing there. But that is only true for its depths. The underside of the islands is actually much more dangerous than their surface. The creatures that dwell there are the true horrors of this place. Some of them stay put, some move through the darkness as they hunt and migrate between islands. So flying under the islands is lethal in its own way. Effie was less concerned with the crushing, since her mighty constitution allowed her to withstand it on par with someone like Master Roan or Sonny himself. She was, however, very interested in all the kinds of nightmare creatures that populated the region. The huntress was determined to finish saturating her core in the month left before their departure. Sonny shared all the knowledge he had about the inhabitants of the Chained Isles. He had spent many months fighting local abominations, so he knew a lot which creatures frequented which island, how they attacked their prey, what their weaknesses were, and so on. He also knew which islands had to be avoided at all costs. By the end of their journey, even Effie seemed impressed by the amount of knowledge he had accumulated. I guess the Academy doesn't pay you for nothing. You really did do a lot of research." Sonny grinned. "When I hunt nightmare creatures, I get to sell their shards and also get paid by the research faculty. So much money, ain't it a dream?" She giggled. "The wonderful thing about you, Sonny, is that you are very easy to please." What is that supposed to mean?" Effie, meanwhile, looked east and asked with a bit of tension. "What about the saint who rules this region? What's your opinion of her?" Sonny thought for a bit, then said with uncertainty, "Sky Tide, she is a bit of a recluse. I don't really know, but her husband is a really decent guy, so that earned her some points in my book." Effie smiled lightly and didn't continue the conversation. On the third day, they finally reached the sanctuary. Due to how high-profile both Raised by Wolves and Nightingale were, the trio was invited to have a meal with Saint Tyrus before visiting the gateway. The dinner was pleasant enough, but when the plates turned empty, the real conversation began. Saint Tyrus looked at Effie and Kai with her usual expressionless severity and asked, "I was surprised to hear that two more of the most brilliant awakened of the new generation had decided to visit my remote and unremarkable citadel. If you forgive my bluntness, to what do I owe the pleasure?" The three of them glanced at each other. They had discussed what to say in advance. At this point, there was no reasonable way to keep their intentions secret, so it was easier to just let the cat out of the bag. Kai smiled politely before answering. That smile of his was charming enough to make a crowd of women faint on the spot, but Sky Tide did not even blink. "We came here with the intention of challenging a nightmare seed. Sonny, awakened Sunless, discovered one not too long ago. Since the seed is years away from blooming and doesn't pose a threat to the waking world at the moment, he didn't inform you. Please forgive him that transgression." Master Roan frowned. "There is a seed on the Chained Isles. Where?" Effie pointed down. "To reach it, we'll have to descend into the depths of the sky below. Song of the Fallen will also be joining us. We plan to use that ancient ship the Fire Keepers are repairing." Roan blinked a couple of times. "Well, how extravagant. At least that explains a few things, I guess." St. Tyrus lingered for a few moments, then asked evenly, "Are you sure that you want to enter a second nightmare? It has been less than a year since the four of you awakened. Most people take much more time to prepare for the rigors of the spell's trial, and even then, many don't survive." A wild smile appeared on Effie's face. "Sure, yes, I guess we are sure as much as anyone can be. The decision to challenge the seed was not made rashly, nor was it based on blind ambition. You are right, of course, but the circumstance of our awakening was not ordinary. Even though it only happened recently between the four of us, we already share a decade of battle experience. And the battles we fought were not soft." Sky Tide did not answer immediately, turning her face away to look at the vista of the Chained Isles. Kai cleared his throat. "Are you going to try and dissuade us, my lady?" Tyrus remained silent for a few moments, then slowly shook her head. "No, if four awakened with the SSA designation want to challenge a nightmare seed, They must know what they're doing. Your timing is actually good as well. Sunny frowned slightly. Good timing, what does she mean? But Sky Tide wasn't going to elaborate. Instead, she looked at Effie and asked, "When do you leave?" The huntress shrugged. "Cassie and Sunny have an errand to run in the Night Temple, so we'll depart as soon as they return." Tyrus shifted her gaze to Sunny. Was he imagining things, or did her expression become darker? "You are going to the Night Temple, Sunless." He nodded. "Yes, it is a part of our preparations. Why?" The beautiful saint remained silent for a few moments, then said simply, "Be careful to strictly follow the rules while you're there." Sunny politely agreed. Inwardly, though, he was a bit disturbed. Well, that did not sound ominous at all. Cassie, too, had seemed a bit apprehensive about the Night Temple. Just what kind of a place was it? Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story. And if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.